Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Soulcast Media live event. If everybody can see me and can hear me, be sure to give me a thumbs up on your guys' end, whether you're on your phone or on your desktop or tablet. Just give me a thumbs up so I know that the audio is working. I always make sure that this is the first thing I check because sometimes you never know if there are any technical difficulties. So again, if you can hear me and see me, give me a thumbs up, or you can do like kind of the clapping, whatever it is. Just make sure to do that just so I know the audio is working. So again, welcome everybody to our Soulcast Media live event. Today is a very special event. I'm so excited for us to dive into today's topic. But before we get started, I want to let everybody know that today's session, our conversation today, is going to be about 35 to 40 minutes. And it's very much a conversation with me and my guests, but we also want to make sure that we answer any questions that you have in regards to our topic today, which at this point you might know what it is. It's all about communications and leading high performing teams. My guest and I, we were chatting right before we started this, and we were kind of talking about all the things we wanted to cover today. And it's a lot. And the best thing about it, a lot of the things we're going to be talking about is relevant to the work that we do today. So again, if you have any questions, you can throw it in the chat function, which again, it could be on your right-hand side, your left-hand side, or on the bottom. But if you have any questions for us as Hamilton and I are chatting, put it in the chat function and we'll be sure to bring up your questions because we want to make sure that we have time to answer it. We're just so grateful that you're spending the time with us, whether it's your morning, your evening, and that's the beauty of it. I'm seeing folks dialing in from all over the world, Australia, Canada, India, of course, here in the States. Hamilton and I were both here in California. I know there's some folks in California as well. So again, welcome. And we're just so excited for you guys to be here. So without further ado, let's get started. So I'm going to introduce my guest. My guest today here is Hamilton Chen. And what I'm really excited about is the fact that he actually has been in a lot of different industries. And what I mean by that is he's worked in the finance industry. He's also a lawyer. He's also worked in entertainment. He's also been an entrepreneur. So he's really has had a huge amount of experience, which makes our conversation today really valuable because I think when you kind of have a good understanding of all these different areas, you're also able to figure out how to be adaptable, agile, which of course is really critical. In fact, for those who don't know, I used to be a former TV news reporter as well. And because that was the industry I was in, I also had to learn a lot about this field and this industry, business, politics. And again, I think it's a really valuable skill. So without further ado, let me introduce and bring up my guest, Hamilton Chen. Let's see. Hamilton, hi, can you see us and hear us?
Yes, absolutely. Hi, Jessica. How are you? Thank you so much for the kind intro. That was awesome. I should put that on repeat and listen to it every morning. Feel good about myself.
I love this like positive energy. That's what it's all about, right? So again, Hamilton, thank you so much for spending, I guess it's kind of our early evening right now. It's 5 o'clock here in California. But again, we have people from all over the world dialing in right now. And, you know, there's so many things I want to ask you. So
yes,
why don't you give a quick introduction to yourself? I know I kind of touched on it, but I feel like the audience would love to hear from you and kind of the work that you do.
Absolutely. Happy to. So just like you said, I've basically sampled many different worlds, and I think I've had to learn to improvise a lot in my career. So as kind of basic nuts and bolts, I'm based here in Los Angeles. This was where I was born and raised. I went to Harvard for college, majoring in psychology. And then I went to work at JP Morgan in Hong Kong and in New York, doing mergers and acquisitions and investment banking. And then I went to Harvard Law School, graduated, came back, practiced corporate law at a firm called Munger, Tolles and Olson, where I represented clients like Berkshire Hathaway, the late Kobe Bryant, big companies. I tried to mix things up and move into entertainment. So I worked at MGM as a business affairs executive, didn't love kind of corporate politics. So I thought, you know what, I just need to be my own boss. And so I took over my family business, which happened to be in commercial printing, ran the company alongside my dad, and was CEO ultimately for 16 years. And that's really when I cut my teeth as an entrepreneur. and learned the power of communication. I also started a tech startup and went through Y Combinator in the summer of 2011, which is an incubator up north. It's now become quite the juggernaut. Its portfolio companies are worth more than $550 billion in aggregate, including companies like Coinbase and Dropbox and Airbnb and DoorDash. And so one thing I always wished for when I was an entrepreneur running both companies simultaneously, also being a young dad with 2 kids and married, I thought, I need to talk to somebody who is not my equity investor, who is not my employee, or even my wife and my best friends. I didn't want to tilt every conversation towards me and my problems. So I thought it would be really helpful to just pay someone to listen to me. And so ultimately in 2016, I sold my businesses. And that's when I moved into this role as an executive coach. And I've now coached more than 200 Y Combinator founders. Some of them are CEOs of 0-employee companies, and some of them have thousands of employees. So it's really spans the gamut. It's always fascinating. Several years ago, I also became a professor at LMU Loyola Law School in Los Angeles, where I now head and I started and run now their executive education program, where we teach practical skills that relate to law, such as negotiations. And so I'm so happy to be here to be able to speak with your audience.
So we have so many things that we're going to be touching upon today. And, just listening to your background, and I know, so both of us, obviously, we're entrepreneurs. We both have our own business, but I know for a lot of folks who are on this right now, perhaps you're working for a company, you're working with a team, a big corporate company or a small company, regardless of what kind of industry you're in. I truly believe, in Hamilton, you probably agree, communications is one of those skills that is one of the most important skills. And it obviously, there's no barriers to it. It's necessary, and you have to know how to do it well, regardless of where you are at.
Yes.
So one of the first questions I wanted to ask you, Hamilton, and of course, I will always chime in and add my kind of 2 cents to this.
Please do. Yes.
So I know some of the work that you do now is you talked about negotiation. This is one of the things that you and I were talking about kind of behind the scenes before we jumped on this. And so when I think about negotiation, it's not even about like price negotiation, right? It's more about like sometimes when you're working with your team, how do you negotiate so that you get your ideas heard, right? And I think a lot of us kind of can struggle with that. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on this idea of negotiating in the workplace when you're working with teams. How can you make sure that, if you have an idea, your ideas are heard, it's respected, but also you're not also dominating the conversation either. So I'd love to get your tips and advice when it comes to that topic.
I think it's a great question. I think it's so relevant to so many. I feel like communication is what we think of when we think of verbal communication, but really we communicate so much with our actions, with the way that we interface with the world. And so I really want to encourage your audience to think of communications more globally. And I think negotiations is definitely a perfect example of one of those things where there's so much nonverbal communication that really does matter. And even deciding whether to pick something up as a potential battle, picking your battles, I think is another key skill in being effective ultimately. So there's kind of the meta before you even get into the negotiation itself and before you even try to get your ideas across. But I would say the first thing that people should really focus on is owning their voice and really feeling like they have something to contribute and having self-confidence to speak up and articulate. A lot of people are nervous. They're nervous about how they're going to be perceived. They're nervous about saying something wrong. They're nervous if it's their place to speak up at all. So I think the first thing is just really feeling license and feeling positivity, confidence, self-belief, and it starts from there. So, I'll stop there. What do you think about that? Let's make it collaborative.
I love that. And I think that is, and when I teach people communications in our trainings, I always say mindset is the foundation of how you can even become a better communicator. Because a lot of folks that I work with are like, I just want to be a better speaker. But I know you want to get there, but a lot of it is a mindset shift first, because you have to personally feel confident in yourself. You have to be clear-minded in order for you to effectively communicate. So, I mean, you mentioned these things of like, making sure, you're also positive too, but I completely agree with you. I think mindset and having a clear mind, knowing yourself, knowing trigger points, knowing when is it that you get most anxious in these meetings. Is it when this person speaks up, or is it when you're put on the spot, or whatever situation? I think having that self-awareness, I agree, is number one to really honing just in general good communication skills.
I love it. I agree wholeheartedly. And I think once you've got the internal green light that you have license to speak to the world and to advocate for your own ideas, I think the next part that I tend to favor is building relationship and building rapport. So, you see politicians doing this in Congress. If they want to get the right vote on their bill, they're going to meet one on one and caucus individually. So I think this is an example of simply getting buy-in and trying to build support from the ground level up. So I think ineffective leaders will sometimes over apply their trade in being top down and saying, this is the way it must be. I think parents face this a lot where they're like, you know what, do it because I said so. But I think the modern leader is one who allows their staff to be empowered and to come to their own conclusions. So you really need to find a way to light the fire from within on people and let them come to their own conclusions, let them see the light, let them get that feeling that you care about the mission of your enterprise, that you care about them individually and personally. So the negotiation even begins there with, bartering, trying to help them get their way, and speaking on terms that are ultimately going to be convincing to them, not just to you yourself.
When you were talking about buy-in, it made me think of these two things that I often talk about in the training that we do. A lot of times people think, oh, the buy-in I need to get is just from my boss. But that's actually not always the case. Sometimes you really have to think a little bit more strategically of, for example, if you have an idea that you're really excited about, that you want to bring into your next meeting, and you're thinking, oh, I just need my boss to approve this. Sometimes a more strategic way to approach something like that is actually getting the buy-in of your peers or people who are kind of perhaps the same level as you, because I believe that there's power in numbers, right? If a good number of you are liking this idea, then you can better present it to your boss. The other thing that you mentioned was relationships, and how building relationships is actually quite important. And it's also quite related to communications. And the reason why relationships is so important is because if you also are developing relationships with people in your team, what can they do for you? They can advocate for you. It's building that social capital, right? Where when you're not in the room, they're seeing your praises, and that makes you look good. So those are some of the things that kind of popped in my mind as you were saying that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do think, anyone who's watched Survivor, the reality TV show, understands the importance of alliances. And you never want to get blindsided, and you want to make sure that you have strong alliances when you go in. Not to make it sound so Machiavellian, but, imagine, for example, that you want to pitch to your boss in a group team meeting that we should get a new espresso machine. And you could say, hey, I think we should get a new espresso machine. It might fall on deaf ears and get no traction at all. But if you speak first to your peers in the room and say, hey, I was thinking of proposing this. What do you think? Like, oh my God, I would love that. Then when you say the idea, everyone's like, second it, third it, fourth it, love it. Yeah. Then all of a sudden the boss is like, okay, well, I guess this is going to happen. So that's part of preparing. That's part of building rapport, building relationships, and being more than just an individual contributor, a solo artist, but really thinking about the mesh network that is your colleagues and trying to have influence within an organization.
Yeah. So I'm actually seeing some of the comments come in, and to answer folks, this is live. This is live, meaning if you have any questions that you want us to answer, you actually can just type it in the chat function. I see it. And if I see your question, I can pull it up, and then Hamilton and I can answer it, because again, this is for you guys to really think about communications, any questions that you may have. This is the time. So for those actually who are just jumping on right now, I just want to welcome everybody again really quickly to this Soulcast Media live event here. I have my guest Hamilton Chan, and we're talking about communicating to lead high-performing teams. So let's talk about this topic of communicating to lead high-performing teams. So I know a lot of the work that you do is, coaching founders and CEOs to I assume, better lead their team. So
Yeah.
what are some strategies? And for those who are on this, whether you are a manager or not, I think a lot of this is really relevant to just your own personal development. But what have you found, Hamilton, that really distinguishes good managers from bad managers and how they can lead their teams for more success? What are some things that people can think about for themselves?
Okay. I mean, I have a bevy of thoughts here. I actually did get an email just about an hour ago from a Y Combinator founder who said, Hamilton, emergency session needed. I'm supposed to pitch NASA next week. So I need to know how to put the pitch together. So it's super relevant for a lot of people, whether you're the CEO or a manager of a team or an individual contributor. I think one thing that I would urge people to think about when they communicate is to really employ storytelling skills. When everyone's a critic when it comes to watching the latest Marvel movie or the latest rom-com. They know what makes a good movie instinctively, but they don't necessarily dish it back out when it's their turn to shine. And so I would encourage people to employ storytelling skills. So among other things, you want to build suspense, use vivid details, allow the story to ebb and flow, have dynamics, add sizzle, add fireworks. I think having an emotional resonance with the listener is really important. So a lot of people, we go through work and we're like, here's this boring chart, here's this boring, OKR, but really you need to get buy-in by getting people to really believe in the story. And so I would tell people to, understand the tenets of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, where we have a call to adventure and we have the opportunity to make lasting change in ourselves. Start with the problem, give the hero obstacles, and then present a solution. Use other storytelling elements like the power of surprise and relatability is also important. So if you want to be an effective communicator, you're going to have to employ all of these things at once.
So for those who are watching right now, I think sometimes saying the words incorporate storytelling, a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, like I don't even know how to do that. And it's like
Yeah.
when, where, how, why. Well, I don't think we need to talk about the why. I think it's, well, I can't say unanimous, but I feel like it's good common knowledge that storytelling is a powerful way to be an effective communicator. But the question is, how and when do you do this? Do you incorporate storytelling when you're talking to your boss? Do you incorporate storytelling when you're in team meeting? Where do you see storytelling fitting in? Because we know it's important for communications, but it's like, how often are we supposed to be telling stories, and does it get the job done?
I mean, I think you can pick and choose your places. If someone says, why were you late? I don't know that you have to get into a huge, thrill chaser story about how you couldn't get the right parking spot. Forget it. Just move on. But I think if you are trying to get a team swept up in a mission, if you're trying to recruit a new potential hire, that's when you're really going to have to pass on that vision. Sometimes you may even be surprised by the impact that you have on other people. I once had an employee tell me, he said, Hamilton, I would follow you off a cliff. And I thought, man, that is high praise in my mind, because it shows that the loyalty factor was there because he believed in what I was doing. I had another employee who said to me that the reason why she was at the company was because she felt that I was a visionary. So what is it that gets people to say stuff like this? It's when they are really wrapped up in the story, in the mission, when they can see your actions and they believe that they want to bear that flag. They want to have that name on their jersey. So I think you want to employ these tactics when it's a high stakes moment, when you're pitching a venture capitalist, when you are recruiting a new hire, when you're trying to convince the team that a pivot is what makes sense. Even when you terminate or lay off an employee, you want to make sure that you do so in an empathetic and kind manner. So I would say every single day, you're going to be using this skill.
initially when I think about storytelling, so storytelling is obviously very key to some of the work that I do, especially because of my background as a former TV reporter. It was always about telling the stories, but I do
Yeah.
think there's a lot of real world translation. And I think what's probably most easy for people to grasp is I think the easiest way to incorporate storytelling in your communications today is essentially when you have an idea that you want your team to get on board. I think incorporating storytelling in why you're excited about this idea, why this is going to transform your team, your business, or whatever, incorporating storytelling in that way, I think can be quite powerful. Which actually leads me to one of the questions that we have from one of the people who is actually watching. I'm actually going to put this question from Leo. So his question is, and I definitely want to answer this one, and I have some thoughts too. How do you influence the team with strong leadership communication? So what are some key takeaways? So with this question, I'm thinking of the word influence. So what are some things that you, I, anybody who's listening right now, they can think about to try to influence, persuade other people? Because yes, I agree, this is a very important leadership skill. So any thoughts there, Hamilton,
Yeah.
on influencing others?
This is persuasion is an art, and I think there are certain key tenets, certain pillars, certain takeaways. For example, it's hard to be persuasive if you don't have people's attention. So you will tend to lose people's attention if you go on tangents, are confusing, do not have a clear time delimiter on how long you're going to speak, don't have clear bullets in mind. So I think voice modulation, calling out what your arguments are will be really important. So there are some best practices I think that people can employ to be particularly persuasive. Start off with a thesis, back it up with 3 points, give it a few vivid examples, make sure you're clear, and then wrap it up. So I think those are the basics, but it's amazing how seldomly people follow it. I think it's because it's a lot of learned skill. I have a young daughter, and when she tells me stories, I'm like, whew, this is very roundabout. The things that don't need emphasis are getting emphasis. I don't know when it's going to end. And of course, I love her to pieces, but I want to improve her storytelling ability also so that things are contained in a capsule size. We don't, when someone orders a piece of pie at a restaurant, we don't serve them something that's the size of the table. Like there's a right sizedness to so many things in life. And I think points need to be made in the right size as well. And they need to be digestible, and they also need to be interesting. What do you think?
So yeah, so basically what I'm hearing is influence is also being very clear and concise, right?
Mhm.
It's very hard to influence people when you are long winded in your explanation because, again, you'll lose your audience, and that is not influence. One tactic that I was thinking about as you were talking is a good way to influence people is to go from this I mentality to a we
Mm,
mentality. It's
absolutely.
very hard to influence people when they feel that your idea is self-serving. Yes, it could benefit you, but you kind of have to think of it from like a bird's eye view of like, why does your idea benefit the team? Why does it benefit other people?
Yes.
Because if you can get their buy-in, which is what we just talked about earlier, they are more likely
Mhm.
to be like, huh, that is a good idea. I kind of do want to do that.
Yes.
And that's influence, right?
100%. I think that a lot of this goes back to negotiating. And one thing we teach in negotiations is the difference between articulating your position versus articulating your interest. So the interest is the why, the position is the what. A lot of times we are talking at each other and saying, this is what I need, this is what I want. Those are the whats. But the why is when you can really start to get closer to somebody else and you can ask them, okay, I understand that's your position. You want, a refund on your bill. Talk to me about why. And it might be that it's because of unfairness, it might be because of urgency, it might be because of promises made, all these other things. But you can then engage the other person and show them that you're actively listening, that you're getting to the bottom of it. And then you might unlock an interesting solution that wasn't even your original agenda, but is something that is a win-win for both sides. So I think it's not just about advancing your case, but just like you say, it's
Mhm.
solving problems globally for everyone involved.
Exactly. In fact, I'm looking at one of the comments. Jorge chimed in and said it's all about partnership building, which is true. You know, what's that saying? Like, if you want to go fast, go alone, or if you want to go far, go with other people. Did
Go
I
with
just
other
butcher
people.
that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No. I don't think anyone ever has figured out exactly how it's stated, but I've heard it said that way many times, and I've jumbled my way through that many times as well. But yes, I think the idea is we can only go so far by ourselves. And so if you're going to truly have impact in this world, you're ultimately going to want to recruit other people to your cause. And by the
Which is
way, once again, that's one of the hero's journey elements is recruiting allies.
Exactly. And again, that's kind of, again, talking about the topic that we have here today, which is the teams. It's working with other people and how to do so effectively. And, you know, I get it. You know, sometimes there's people on your team that you may not mesh well with. There might be some friction between you and this other person. But overall, it's trying to find ways, you know, whether it's through, you know, being a little bit more strategic with like how you deal with them or whatever it is. But again, teams is really about people. It's really about understanding human dynamics. It's not about you. It's about how together we can accomplish this task. One of the things that I love talking about, and I want to talk about it today with you to get your thoughts about it, is I feel confidence and communications is very closely linked, right? You and I kind of talked about this behind the scenes, but for people who want to level up in their career, but for some reason don't feel confident in their ability or don't feel confident speaking up, or just have overall a lack of, just feeling good about where they are. What do you say, and what can people do to better feel confident about themselves, their performance, and their role in their team, if it's overall a confidence issue?
I think a certain amount of self-reflection is important and self-awareness. I think a lot of people have negative self-talk. One of the things I like to do for fun on the side is I like to play tennis. And I think tennis is considered a very mental game. You'll see players who get really down on themselves and throw their rackets or say they suck. And there are other people who are really good at doing their fist pumps and kind of slapping themselves and just telling themselves to get going. So I think in a similar manner in the competitive arena of office politics, you can also psych yourself up and you can also give yourself some positive self-talk to combat some of that. I think, ultimately, in order to be able to communicate effectively, you're also going to need good tools, good skills. So I think brushing up on that can be helpful. Sometimes people will take an acting class or an improv class to just get themselves out of their own skin. When I work with people one-on-one, sometimes I will have them read a passage in a book and I'll have them read it over and over again until they can say it very fluently and until they can say it with voice modulation. I'll even have them stand on top of a chair and speak it down to me to create that sense of dominance and power. I think ultimately you can do things to get better at speaking. And you can also employ positive self-talk to psych yourself up, to make yourself feel a little bit better. So, those are a couple tips. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, like, again, confidence is definitely something that has to be dealt with like internally, right? I mean, no one can tell you, hey, you just got to feel confident, right? You have to feel it yourself. So I think there definitely does take some introspection. If perhaps you're not feeling confident because somebody said something to you or they criticized your work, right? Trying to be as black and white as possible and trying to kind of take as much as you can, just kind of like a lot of that emotion out of it and just kind of see it for what it is. And there was this book that I was reading, but it was a really good reminder of just try not to take things personally, because when you take things personally, that can really crush your self-confidence, right?
Yes.
And when it comes to work, I mean, that's probably the place to try to employ it the most, is really not trying to take things personally. But, we all know that office politics can be a thing, right? Because again, we're all human. So there's always emotions involved. But I think if we're trying to be as clear-minded as possible, if we're trying to get things done and trying to be as proactive, again, it's really trying to take that, try to be as black and white as possible. This actually brings me to a question that we also have that I want to pull up from one of our members who are here right now, because it does kind of talk about, it is a little bit confidence related, but the question is, how do you work with a sensitive manager who just sometimes like overreacts to problems?
Okay.
What are your thoughts about this, Hamilton?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is manage expectations when somebody is prone to overreaction. So just think about how you message things. You know, you could say, oh, there's some smoke in the kitchen, I've got it under control. Or you could say, the house is on fire. You know, so it could be the same set of circumstances, but how do you portray it? How do you suggest to people what's being done about it? Overreaction to problems, you know, there's a saying, I think, also in management, which is managers should ask their staff, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. So you never want to present, ideally, a problem without a solution. So the servers are down, but I got a team working on it, is probably the best way to present a problem. So I think in terms of, you know, managers being sensitive and overreacting, I do think also making sure that you yourself, just like you said, are not over personalizing the sensitivity and ascribing too much to yourself. I think depersonalizing it, if you don't feel it, they won't feel it. But if you feel it, it's possible that you're projecting it onto them and they're sensing your fear or your panic as well.
You mentioned something that I think is really important, which is if you feel that your manager is, you know, overreacting because of X problem, I think a lot of it is how you approach communicating it, right? So you mentioned it earlier. It's not just saying, oh my God, the house is on fire, right? It's saying the house is on fire, but this is how we can, you know, extinguish the fire, right? So you're, again, offering the solution in addition to the problem. Because if you go in guns a-blazing saying, oh my God, you know, our system's down or whatever, they're going to also freak out. But if you say the system's down and this is what I think we need to do now, it's A, B, and C, your boss will be like, oh, wow, you know, you're actually very proactive. You're using your critical thinking skills to try to solve that problem. And that may alleviate some of the anxiety your boss may be feeling because you just suddenly threw something on their desk and they're just like, what the heck, right? So,
well, it goes back to storytelling. Like, which story are we going to tell? Are we going to tell the story of the house that burned down, or we're going to tell the story of the house that was saved from the fire? I think also, if your manager is sensitive, maybe it's worth inquiring, why do you think that they're sensitive? Is it because of, you know, pattern recognition from past disasters? Is it, you know, something about their past? I think always understanding your audience is going to be key to connecting with them.
Yeah. So we're actually getting a lot of questions, a lot of really great questions coming in right now. And I definitely want to try to get to them, but I know.
Let's get them all. Yeah.
Yeah. I know, which is crazy because I feel like it's already, this time has just flown by. And again, we're just so grateful that all of you guys are here and we want to try to answer your questions. But this question is actually one that I have so many thoughts about, but I want to get your thoughts. So how do you improve your speaking skills, particularly in settings where others hold higher positions? What are your thoughts about that?
Okay. So that's an intimidating environment when you have to speak to somebody who has a higher position. But I think the general rules of thumb still apply in terms of how you can burnish your own speaking skills. I think one would be model somebody. So find somebody that you think has a speaking style that you would like. Do you think Steve Jobs is a great speaker? Is, you know, I don't know, John F. Kennedy a great speaker? Find somebody, literally try repeating back those same words. Speak out loud. If you're driving alone in your car, try speaking out loud those things that you would say. My own preparation tips, before I go into a high stakes speaking engagement, I will bullet out my points. So I like writing bullets. Sometimes I'll even, you know, if I have an all hands meeting, I might write out an entire script, just stream of consciousness. When I write it out, then suddenly I discover that I need a theme, I need a hook, I need a point. And I might take a couple seconds to craft that, maybe rephrase tricky things that are difficult to say, and then reduce it down to points. And then maybe keep it in my pocket when I go to the big meeting, but otherwise I'm not referring to it. I don't want it up on the screen. because I don't want to lose my flow and be out of touch with what people are saying and reacting to the crowd. I want to be able to flow in the moment and improvise. So I think preparation is important. I think practice is important. I think having a model that you can emulate is really important. What do you think, Jessica?
Yeah. So speaking skills is definitely one of those things that I love talking about because it's one of the areas where everybody can actually improve on. You just have to invest a little bit in terms of your time, your resources, finding courses or whatever, but there are ways to improve. So if you feel like your communications, your speaking isn't as concise or where you want it to be, there are tons of resources. I'm going to say Soulcast Media. I mean, that's what we do. It's to
Oh,
help
yeah.
people improve their speaking skills, and it's
Yeah.
absolutely doable. And I like the second part of this because it's talking about talking to people in higher positions, and being Asian American, right? I think,
Hmm.
and this is something that I think is close to our hearts, is like,
Yeah.
when we speak to people of authority, we were taught, for example, growing up that, oh my gosh, you just kind of have to like kind of keep your head down, just say yes,
Yeah.
deference to authority. That's the kind of an Asian
Yeah.
principle, right? But when you go out into the working world, you'll realize that, wait a second, if you take that mindset and you bring it into the corporate world, people are just going to trample all over you. You're never going to get a word in, right?
Yes.
So for me, I'll share kind of like what I
Hmm.
had to kind of think about, because when I first started working many, many years ago, I had a really hard time speaking up in meetings because everyone else in the meeting was older than me, more experienced than me. So it was like, who am I to share my 2 cents, right? But then I really had to train myself to think, wait a second, I'm here for a reason. I also know things that perhaps other people don't. Perhaps it may not be through the years of experience, but it's because I may have a different perspective on something, right?
Yeah.
So I think making sure that you are not being too hard on yourself either, which also goes back to the confidence, can give you that confidence to speak up to people who have more experience, who are technically in higher positions. But ultimately, in the end, it's just realizing, again, we're all people. Like, your boss is a person too. Those in management roles, they're people too. And if you kind of go in with this mentality of, oh, I have to kind of like be very strict, and I have to kind of show my professional self, I think people tend to gravitate towards people who have a little bit more personality, honestly.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid to show that, is what I'm saying.
I love the message. I do feel like we live in a multicultural world, and maybe our discussion here is geared towards America, but America is, you know, a very aggressive nation, and people are expected to assert themselves and to raise their
Mhm.
hand. So you don't want to play by East Asian rules in a Western world. Maybe in East Asia, you don't want to play by Western rules either. So you have to always be sensitive to the audience. I think certainly minorities, a lot of times will feel like they're expected to fall in line, and I think it's important to push yourself into the discomfort zone, do things that are not necessarily the way that you would normally behave. This pushes you into growth and into experimentation and trying to get yourself to be something a little bit beyond what the typical expectation is. So I do
Mhm.
feel like Asian Americans, um, I get this also from women in the negotiation context, where they're like, am I supposed to be more manly? Am I supposed to lean
Mhm.
into being feminine? There are a lot of expectations out there. There's a lot of confusion about how to do it. But I think ultimately owning your voice and also understanding what is your base of power. Why are you in the position that you are in? Is it because of your intellect? Is it because of your experience? Is it because of your speaking ability? Is it because of your creativity? There's a reason why you're here. Know what is your base of power and then flex that.
I completely agree. I think a lot of us are our own harshest critics, honestly. Because we know ourselves the most, and we can be the ones to doubt ourselves the most. But again, I love talking about confidence and communications because I do think they're really closely linked. But I think it's also
Mhm.
understanding, like, wait a second, am I just being too hard on myself? Do people really perceive me that way? And if, chances are it's because you really are pretty tough on yourself. And people are probably too busy thinking about other things than thinking about you, really.
Mm-hmm.
So just want to say, we've been at this for 45 minutes, which has flown by. I always say these
Awesome.
Soulcast Media Lives, they're so fun because, I mean, it's a topic I always like talking about communication. So anytime I have somebody come on, I think it's just like a fun conversation. And I love answering people's questions. But kind of like as we like start to wrap up here, Hamilton, do you have any kind of key takeaways, points that you want people to kind of walk away with? I call them golden nuggets, essentially. Any golden
Golden
nuggets,
nuggets.
things that you have experienced in your career that you think people should know, good lessons, or anything. And I'm happy to share a few myself.
Wow. I feel like we've covered a lot. So I'm
Yeah.
just going to, rather than repeat or recap, just say a couple of other things maybe that we haven't mentioned. I think one that I would say, hearing you talk and hearing you say, it's flown by. I think your passion for public speaking and communication is infectious, and people can see that. So my advice to folks is, talk about the things that you love. When it's a subject that you love, you will find yourself in the most natural element. One company that I seem to be really focused on these days is Tesla. And I'm kind of a Tesla fanatic. I drive a Tesla. I have a Tesla solar panel on my house. I invest in the stock. I know way too much about this company. So if someone wants to talk to me about Tesla, you're going to see me light up. And I probably could talk nonstop for 4 hours about Tesla. There's just so much knowledge here that is bursting to fly out. And that's how one ought to be about the subjects, I think, that they're interested in. And kind of a tangent off of that is, in order to be interesting to people, be interested. So I feel like I have a decent amount of curiosity on many subjects. So I find myself going down rabbit holes and reading about rabbit holes on Wikipedia and other areas, watching YouTube videos to learn about certain areas. When you know about a lot and sample from many different arenas, you're going to be more interesting when you talk to other people. So those are my last golden nuggets for you.
I love it. Actually, when you're mentioning the having interest, it reminded me of a recent Soulcast Media Live that I did. It was with the chairman of Citibank in the South Asia region. And he came on, and him and I were just, of course, chatting about communications. And he was talking about how, and the theme was more about building relationships and small talk. But essentially, if you want people to gravitate towards you, kind of like, engage with you, you have to have things to talk about. And that means you have to have other interests other than work too.
Yes.
So you mentioned you kind of go down like different rabbit holes here and there, but the beauty of that is, whoever you meet, if they want to talk about sports one day, if they want to talk about art one day, if they want to talk about Tesla one day, you always have your 2 cents to add to these things, which is why I always encourage folks that sometimes, perhaps a lot of us can get into this like, okay, just work mentality. But I think, as we know in business, it's a human relationship, it's human dynamics. So expanding your scope of interest is a great way to also be an interesting person too, so that people will be like, oh, I really enjoyed that conversation with so-and-so because this person had a lot to say about this. So constantly just educating yourself. I mean, it can be truly as simple as just reading the news, which I'm sure I imagine some of us already do. But it's just kind of like staying on top of these things can make you as a person really interesting. And people, again, will want to engage with you. So
Totally. And some people have a knack for just being very personal and interpersonal. And I think part of it is being vulnerable and disarming people with giving them a little bit of a window into their world. So even as you talk about, interests, I'm like, oh yeah, what are you interested in? Like, it'd be really interesting. People already know that I play tennis now, and they know that I'm into Tesla. But what else makes me who I am? And that's when people forge a strong connection. There once was a study done where they had 2 strangers in a dating scenario ask each other something like 21 questions. And these questions were designed to create intimacy and to create vulnerability and a deeper understanding of people. And it turns out that the mere asking of those questions made a lot of the people end up wanting to continue with the date and even get married. So it's really powerful when you peel below the surface and get past the superficial small talk and actually get to know someone. Ultimately, that's the base of power of any strong communicator.
I agree. I think this is so important because sometimes a lot of us are just thinking about, okay, I just need to deliver, perform, get my job done, that kind of stuff. But again, so many decisions are made again based off of emotions and what people think of you. That's not just metrics related solely, right? Of course, performing is very important for any job, but it's like, do I like working with this person? Do I enjoy hanging around this person? Like, these are subconscious things that people think about when they are making decisions. And I think, again, being interesting, being able to engage with other people is really part of that. So
Awesome.
Hamilton, where can people find you if they want to get in contact with you?
They could go visit the Loyola Law School Los Angeles Executive Education website, which is llx.lls.edu. And feel free to reach me through that. Maybe sign up for one of our negotiation courses, and look forward to seeing your audience online.
Well, again, Hamilton, thank you so much. And I really want to thank everybody who, stayed and the whole time and, asked all these questions for us. I'm sorry if we didn't get to all your questions, but feel free to direct message me or Hamilton if there's any questions that we didn't get to, because again, we want to be, perhaps Hamilton, you too, but I just want everybody to feel comfortable. And if you have any questions in regards to communications, feel free to reach out to us. One announcement that I do want to make as we kind of wrap up here is here at Soulcast Media, we do have a monthly communications program. And because of the holiday season, we typically have a wait list for that. But we are opening up so that anybody who wants to join today can actually join our membership program today. So you'll see the link dropped in our chat function. So if you're interested in joining our communications program here at Soulcast Media, this is a monthly program where you and I, as well as a small group of people, we meet everyone and we talk about communications. And I'm there to give you feedback on public speaking, presentations, interpersonal communications, anything communications related. So if you guys have not heard of that, be sure to check it out. So Hamilton, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for spending, this last 45, 50 minutes with us. But more importantly, thank you everybody who stayed on, and hopefully you guys enjoyed our chat. We do these about twice a month. However, because of the holidays coming up now, our next one is going to be in January. So this is technically our last one this year. But if you guys are not on our Soulcast Media newsletter, be sure to get on that, because that is where we announce our next event. So you can do that on soulcastmedia.com. Hamilton, thank you so much. Be sure to follow Hamilton on LinkedIn and get in contact with him. And if you guys are not following me on LinkedIn, be sure to add me. I'm always talking about communications and how to improve it. So, well,
thanks
thank you,
for having
everybody.
me, Jessica. It was a blast.